We are back with another episode of Travis. Can I deduct this travel expense? That's not the name of this podcast, but today we are talking about travel. It is summertime. I love summertime. There are lots of places. You know how many people are like, oh, this place is great in the summertime. Oh, you got to come in the summertime. It's a great time to come visit this place. There are so many great places in the summertime. And so there's lots of traveling going on. And as a practice owner, you might be asking yourself, can I deduct this travel? Well, it's kind of personal, but I'm going to do some business. It's with my wife. You know, maybe your wife's on payroll. Maybe your spouse is on payroll. Can I just deduct this whole thing? Well, lucky you. The IRS has had a lot of people test their patience with what you can deduct for travel expense as a business owner. And today we're going to talk about how the IRS views travel and how you can legitimately deduct some travel expenses this summer and beyond, any time of the year. So let's get into it and talk about travel expenses. All right, there is one overarching theme that the IRS has when it comes to travel. And that theme is, what is the primary purpose of your travel? Now, you can just answer that in spirit of like, why am I going to Chicago this weekend? Is it for a great big dental show, or is it for pleasure and going to a Cubs game? I've always wanted to go, so I'm going to go, right? So what is the primary purpose? Now, you could say you're going to a dental show, but really you want to go to a Cubs game. How would the IRS really know, right? So there's this idea of documentation. What documents are you going to give the IRS to show them that the intended purpose of this travel was work related? Are you going to show them all these emails you have with people about talking about meeting up at some great big dental show? That is documentation. The IRS would say, okay, yeah, clearly you're going, for business purposes. Now, one kind of idea that will keep coming up when we talk about travel is, it's typically understood that if you travel somewhere where you don't live for business, you're going to want to go see some sites, right? And so there's going to be some business days and some personal days. And these matter a lot. And so while we ask this question, what's the primary purpose of your travel? It also goes with this calculation of, well, yes, you went to the dental show, but you spent 2 days at the dental show and 10 days touring Chicago. That's not going to help your idea that it was clearly business, right? So typically, in order to have the primary purpose be business, you need to have more business days than personal days. And when you have more business days than personal, you can typically deduct a lot of the travel expenses. If you have more personal days than business days, there's typically very limited things you can deduct. For example, the business things that you're doing, you can deduct those, but the overall travel and things like that are going to be harder to deduct if it's a personal trip. Now, again, this is one of those things, it's going to be hard to prove. So it's going to come back to, what documentation are you going to give the IRS to show them that it was indeed a business travel experience? So let's go into, if it is business, if you have more business days than personal days, what can you deduct? So first, let's talk about your transportation costs. So this typically is airfare, your flights. If you have a primary business purpose and you have more business days than personal days, you can deduct the entire cost of the flight to and from the location, even if you spend some personal time there. So that's a great thing. Flights are expensive. You want to be able to deduct those. Now, we'll talk about family in a little bit because it gets a little nuanced if you take your family with you. But typically, the travel costs are going to be deductible. If you're driving, the cost of gas and things like that, that's also going to be deductible. Okay. Next is lodging. If you are paying for a hotel, typically the days that you're there for business are going to be deductible. If you stay 2 extra days for some personal stuff, those 2 extra days of hotels are not deductible. But again, your flight back will be. Meals, same thing. If you, for those days that you have business meals, business days, those meals are deductible. Even if you're by yourself, typically you need to be like talking about business with somebody. But if you're out on travel for business, just having any meal, that is typically deductible. And those personal days, those meals are not deductible. Now, one little thing that's kind of cool is weekends and holidays. If you have a business meeting on a Friday and then you have a business meeting on a Monday and you stay for Saturday and Sunday and you do personal stuff, you clearly do some personal stuff Saturday, Sunday, but on Monday and Friday, you clearly do business stuff. The Saturday and Sunday actually gets counted as business days. So not only can you deduct the lodging on those Saturday and Sunday, you can deduct the meals on the Saturday and Sunday. So really cool thing. It's very clearly written in the IRS code section that if there's a weekend or a holiday and it's bookended or it's surrounded on both sides by a business day, a business travel day, then that weekend or holiday then becomes business for these counting of the days and the expenses, even if business doesn't actually happen on those days. So that's kind of a cool thing that you should be aware of. I have had a coworker who, when he found that out, he like organized all his travel. Like if there was a conference that started on Monday, he would fly in on Friday, make sure that he did something legitimately business on Friday, and then he'd get that Saturday and Sunday to do personal stuff, but he would be able to deduct it on those days. So pretty cool. Okay, now what if you're going to take family with you? A lot of times, you're going somewhere special for work. Take my wife, take my kids. Typically, your family, the cost of their airfare is not deductible. Now, what if you say, oh, well, my wife and my kids are on payroll? They are employees. But are your wife and kids going to be doing business things? If you're going to a dental conference, for example, and while you're at the conference, your wife and kids are playing at Disneyland, it's going to be hard to argue that they had a business purpose to be there. Now, if they go to the dental conference with you, that could be different. But typically, as kind of a rule of thumb for like airfare specifically, you got to think about the business days rules for them as well. And most of the time, it's going to be harder to justify it for them. And so it's not going to be deductible for them as far as like transportation costs if it's airfare. Now, if you drove and they're in the car with you, obviously you can deduct that because you were in there and you can deduct those. Now, in lodging, if you have a business day and they went out and they did personal stuff, but they sleep in the same hotel room as you, you can still deduct that hotel room because you had a business day. So there's a little bit of nuance with family when they're coming with you. And just because they're on payroll doesn't mean that that was a business trip for them as well. Thinking about the IRS kind of wanting to see documentation on why the family, needed to be at that travel for business reasons. Just think about that and if you can actually defend that. But typically they're not going to be included as deductible as well. And then there's a little bit of a nuance with international travel. And I was debating on even bringing this up because, I don't know how often it comes up. It will come up. But technically, we talked about how as long as you have more business days, than personal days, you can deduct the whole airplane ticket, right? Well, with international travel, there's some nuance there. Like technically, you're not supposed to deduct the whole airplane ticket. You're supposed to prorate it business personal days, but there are exceptions. For example, if vacation or personal pleasure was not a primary consideration in booking the travel, then you don't have to prorate the travel expenses. Now, how would they know that? Again, this goes back to this like documentation piece. And the IRS puts it on you to prove to them that vacation was not a major consideration in the international travel, right? So somehow you'd have to prove that. Or if less than 25% of your days outside of the US were spent on personal things, then you can deduct the whole airfare, this 25% rule. Or if you had no control over the trip, like a lot of times when you go on these international trips, like, I'm thinking like bigger companies, like they have an itinerary, you don't really have control. Like, oh, we're doing sightseeing at pyramids on this day. Like I didn't really get to pick that. It was personal. So a lot of nuance there, but you might have to be careful with international travel. So there you have it. There are some general guidelines. Again, a lot of it comes back to what's the primary purpose of this travel, and can I document and defend that to the IRS that it is indeed business? And if you can, then yes, deduct it, follow the rules with your transportation, your lodging, your meals, and hopefully you can legitimately write off as much travel as possible and feel good about that deduction as you look at your tax return and know that you did maximize your travel expense as much as possible. Hit me up with any questions if you have any at travis@gouluru.com. That's Travis at GOULURU.com. Would love to hear from you. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.